Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. I'm PJ Trudeau. Thank you for coming to hear about this really exciting presentation, so close yet so far, bridging the gap between in-person, remote, and international staff. We've had lots of discussions at the Roundtable about exactly that. How do we bridge that gap? How do we get everybody to the same place where we need them to be, whether they're working remotely, whether they are on site with us, and knowing with hybrid environments, a lot has changed. So we're always looking for different things that we can do. And today we have a consultant that's with us who really specializes in this. And Jon Antonucci has over 20 years of leadership experience, ranging from coaching youth sports to directing an international organization. His passion for developing leaders has inspired him to begin SML Consultative in early 2023, where he empowers who he calls the forgotten leaders, those frontline and middle management leadership, to effectively engage with their teams via loved-based, servant-minded leadership. In his rare moments of free time, Jon enjoys playing various sports, playing the acoustic guitar, and enjoying the natural beauty of the mountains. Jon currently lives with his wife in Garrett, South Carolina in the US. Thank you, Jon, so much for joining us today. As I said, this is
My
certainly
pleasure.
a topic that we really want to hear more about, and things as HR professionals we could be doing more with. So let me turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, PJ. I appreciate that. And welcome to each and every one of you who's joining. We're having technical difficulties, which is why it was a little late to get started. I can't see anybody because I'm sharing my screen. I'm not certain why that is. But if you can see my screen and I do have the chat window up, we're going to make this work to the best of our ability. I want to thank you for making this a part of your day. I know there's a lot of things you have to do, and you chose to join us, and I'm honored to be with you. So do me a favor in the chat, let me know, where are you coming from? Where are you joining us from? I know we've got people from all over the world, so if you can jump in the chat and let me know where you're coming from and where we're all. Washington, D.C. I see already in the chat. Alexandria, Virginia. Okay, so kind of the D.C., Virginia area, quite a few people in that area. Okay, Wisconsin. My parents met and got married in Wisconsin. Maryland, I was up there a couple of weeks ago. To Chicago, my grandmother lived there. LA, DC, Annapolis, Maryland. Awesome. Okay, a lot up in the Northeast region. I'm a little south of you here in South Carolina. And I just want to ask, keep those keyboards handy because we're going to use this chat a little bit throughout our time together. But let's go ahead and if you're just joining, welcome. Feel free to put where you're coming from in the chat. The other thing I wanted to ask you to put in the chat is what your role is in the organization. I know this is obviously HR Roundtable, so it's HR heavy, but I'm curious specifically who we have here. So what is your role in your organization? I'm very curious to kind of see that because I always want to tailor what I say to make sure it's relevant to who is here. So, okay, HR manager, HR director, HR manager, senior, okay, director, perfect. Okay, training manager, okay, sole training person within the HR. Claudia, I've been there. I'm going to tell you a story about that in a little bit. HR VP, okay, very cool. So, very targeted. This is going to be very targeted to you in HR. Let's go ahead and get started by looking at what we're going to cover today as we engage this topic together. During our time together, we're going to begin with an introduction of our topic so that we're all able to kind of proceed moving together. Oh, a COO. Excellent. Okay, good to know. Thank you for letting me know that, Sylvia. Then we're going to look at what I think are what I'm going to call the real challenges of managers for managers of scattered teams. And then once we're aligned on the challenges, we'll talk about how to overcome some of those difficulties by fostering a culture of unity. And we'll also take a look at 3 skills that your managers need to up level in as they supervise what PJ called intra-remote teams. I thought that was such a cool way to say it. I'd never actually heard that particular lineup, so I went and Googled, like maybe I was just out of the loop. And Google didn't even know what an intra-remote team was. So I just want to say credit to PJ for coining that, and I love intra-remote teams. And then, of course, if we have time, we will make sure that we engage some question and answer period at the end. And at the very end, we will do what you're all actually wanting. The reason you're putting up with me for the next 45 minutes, we'll make sure that we give you that SHRM credit information. So Who's ready to get started? Put yes in the chat if you are ready to get started and start talking about this exciting opportunity, but exciting topic. Yes, yes, yes. Excellent. Let's get started. Thank you so much. Several months back, I met a colleague for coffee. And while it was not the reason for our conversation, the time that we spent together eventually turned to this topic of remote work. And as often happens when this topic comes up, we found ourselves with slightly different viewpoints. My colleague, who I respect greatly, basically was under the opinion that there's no reason for anything other than remote work unless you are a hands-on, maybe blue-collar type position. I suggested that maybe the question was not, should people be allowed to work remotely or should they be forced to come in, but rather the question might be more, how can both individuals and organizations maximize the opportunities that they have to serve? And the reality is that while businesses tend to quibble over whether they should bring their staff back into the office, the reality that many organizations face is, in my opinion, much more complex than simply weighing overhead costs or even productivity metrics. Without a doubt, COVID changed the landscape of employment. People were hired from abroad. People were forced to go home for a while. Then they were sort of allowed to come back. Then they had to come back, but then there was overhead. Things just changed. And so now we kind of have this really unstructured combination of hybrid, remote, in person, and even, of course, international, which I think is creeping more and more into what we're dealing with as organizations. One organization that I've worked with recently has a mixture that is much like this. They have field workers. They're always on the job. They have to be. They work on roofs. They have in-office staff that are usually there, except for maybe rare occasions or a little flexibility. They have hybrid staff, which are remote 3 days a week, in office 2 days a week. They have remote staff, which are most of the time away, but maybe in office once or twice a month. And then they have international staff, which is primarily comprised of virtual assistants that work from home internationally, but work on US hours. So with all of these different, everybody everywhere, how do you maintain an engaged, motivated, and productive working environment? Thankfully, that particular organization is actually doing what is, in my opinion, a pretty great job as they try to effectively navigate this new professional landscape. But we're all faced with some semblance of what I've just described. And managers, I believe, have the hardest role because they're faced with the challenge of providing equal opportunity and fair supervision amid unequal situations and diverse circumstances. So with that being said, what we know it's a problem. We know that these situations exist and it's posing major challenges both for the managers as well as for the HR personnel alike. But what are these challenges? Now, I would be a fool to suggest that I'm the only one that knows the challenges, but if I were to identify what I think are the real challenges that we face, I would give them two names. The first one is lack of visibility, and the second one is lack of relevance. Now, those are kind of keywords, so we have to ask, well, what do we even mean when we say lack of visibility? Because I don't think they're as simple as they sound. So let's dive into each of these for just a moment. Starting with lack of visibility, this includes, at a minimum, the inability to see how people work. It's harder and harder to see what people are actually doing. But here's the thing. I am not suggesting that this is a monitoring issue. I'm suggesting that this is a collaboration issue. When we can't see what people are doing, then we can't see how they're doing it, who they're doing it with, or whether or not synergy is present. And I think what's happening in many organizations is we are treating the lack of visibility issue as a mere oversight issue. And we're trying to solve it with things like monitoring software, daily or weekly check-ins, or even metrics that have to be met in order to ensure that visibility is still present. How many of you are using one of these or maybe a different but similar type of strategy in your business. You're using monitoring software, maybe that's a key logger, maybe that is a screen visibility, something like that. Metrics for sure, absolutely. Metrics are a big thing. If you don't meet the metrics, many of you are probably using something like this. Check-ins, yep, absolutely. I'm seeing the command. And by the way, Claudia, I did see that you're here for the important topic. Thank you so much for joining us. Twice daily check-ins. I know one of a friend, acquaintance of mine, it talks about how her screen is monitored as she works from home. She has 2 daily check-ins that she thinks are a huge waste of time because they do this circle around where everyone has to basically justify what they did that day. These are very common. And I'm not saying that these are not necessary in some context. Bernadette, twice are all of the above, and then weekly check-ins with supervisors, yes. And yeah, Claudia, you said it. Weekly check-ins with supervisors are the best practice, but that's not what I'm talking about. And you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. I'm not saying that these aren't necessary in some cases. I am saying that they don't address the real issue. These are what I'm going to call industrial era solutions in an information age workscape. These are how many widgets did you produce solutions in a world that honestly has robots to build the widgets. These solutions provide a production solution, but they don't solve the problem. And I don't know how many of you caught it, but I said it just a second ago. What did I say that I believe is the real problem with lack of visibility? It's not a lack of production necessarily. It's a lack of collaboration. And so we have to find collaboration solutions if we're going to solve this lack of visibility problem, in my opinion. All right. So if we're needing to solve for the collaboration issues and we want to increase visibility that solves that problem, what can we do? One of the most powerful tools that can really help solve collaboration is creating projects that are worked on by teams. If your people work alone, they're less likely to engage with others, less likely to gain the insight of others, less likely to synergize, less likely to find creative solutions, and less likely to add meaningful value. Then, if we want to monitor something, and we all like to monitor things, that's just the reality of who we are as human beings. So if we want to monitor things, I would say, let's start monitoring conversations. Now, I don't mean that some creepy, I listen to everything you've ever said and I'm going to hold it against you. That's not what I mean. I mean paying attention to who people are talking to and how much, right? The question becomes, are you connecting with your coworkers? Are you collaborating? If you're in office, are you reaching out to the people that are not? If you're not in office, are you reaching out to the people that are? Is there healthy dialogue happening? Because that's what's going to tell you whether or not there is real collaborative productivity that's happening. And you can also kind of know whether or not people are being productive based on who and how long. I can think of one example of a leader in an organization that I was working with there, where they were spending hours on Teams calls with one of their colleagues who was in a different department. Turns out there was no collaboration going on. What had started as a genuine, meaningful project had turned into chit chat and was robbing them both of massive energy. And so while yes, you could say, well, check-ins and metrics and monitoring software would solve that, what it doesn't do is it doesn't necessarily lead to authentic collaboration. All it does is clamp down on don't do the wrong thing. And so when we're talking about making sure collaboration is fostered, we want to make sure that we are looking at the right things. One other thing we can look at is what I call mutual accountability. We talk about check-ins. I love check-ins, but what are we doing? Is it me standing? If I'm the director, am I standing there? What did you do? What did you do? What did you do? Or can we engage in what I like to call this mutual accountability, where we are basically saying, hey, this is the ongoing practice of authentic feedback within the teams. And that may be something as simple as requiring all team members to sign off on a project before it's deemed complete, or it may be as complex as thorough peer review at every stage in the project. But you'll notice that we're once again investing in the team structure instead of in this harsh accountability, which is really rooted back from an industrial age of leadership where it was all about widgets produced and not about genuine value added. So for those of you that need to monitor something, that last one, that kind of gives you something to monitor, that mutual accountability. It still lets you say, hey, I have verification that we have done this, we've done it correct, it's gone through a QA process. And so you can kind of combine some of that, which makes that a unique and neat opportunity. All right. So that's the lack of visibility. And in my opinion, the bigger issue is less about the production and more about the collaboration. But what about the second one? Lack of relevance. Lack of relevance. What do I mean by that? Who would like to guess what I mean when I say that lack of relevance is a huge problem in this scattered work environment? Throw it in the chat. Any ideas you have about what I mean by the word relevance? If anybody has any ideas, I'll give you just a second to think about that. It's kind of a weird word to use in this context, isn't it? Nobody? Hopefully I didn't cut out. There we go. Relevance to the work others are doing. All right. Alyssa, I like that. Or I think it's Alyssa. Alicia?
Alicia.
Alicia, thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. Connection, Sylvia, excellent. All right. You guys are very, very, very much on, and you're very much with me, and I love that. I love the synergy that's already happening. So those both are fantastic. Here's what I believe. I believe that people want to be a part of something significant. I think that people want to contribute. I think people want to know that their work is meaningful. I think people want to know that they matter. And if I sum all of that up into one tidy little bundle, I think that at the core, people want to be loved. That's really the deepest need of humanity, is to feel loved. And that's the whole reason. I don't know how many of you guys caught this in that first slide, but the logo for SML Consultative, the organization I have the privilege of leading, there's a heart in the light bulb. The light bulb is inspiration, all that, but it's rooted in love, because that's really what people want. So we won't spend a ton of time on this yet, but I will say that most engagement strategies, and especially employee engagement strategies that I see used by companies, don't really address this aspect of the employee experience. It's more benefits and other very important things, but not always, and maybe I should say not even usually, the things that are really giving people a sense of purpose, a sense of place, a sense of unity. And that is so much exacerbated by everybody being spread out. I think it's a major challenges for leaders who have teams that tend to be given more busy work, the busy work, than really significant, meaningful contribution opportunities. Instead of feeling all of these things that we have on the screen, people are feeling what? Micromanaged, distrusted, over demanded. And so we'll discuss more on this directly in the section on management upskilling. But for now, I think we can agree that both of these are huge challenges. Now, there's probably other challenges that we have, but most of these are huge challenges. And unfortunately, I don't think this is the conversation that as many people are having as I would like anyways. And I think that's unfortunate. So I want to give us a moment to talk about it. And PJ, are you able to do the breakout rooms for us real quick?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So what I would like to do now, I want to invite you to discuss how you feel about these concepts in breakout rooms. Once we split everybody up, I want to invite you to share anything that you would like, your experiences, your opinions, whatever it is, with the others that are there in the room with you. And we will be back shortly. And PJ, whenever you are ready, we can do that first breakout room session.
And just for the record, no one joined my breakout room.
Okay.
I was the only one.
Yeah, same with me.
Same with me.
Yeah. So I think it looks like most people have come back. And so, noting what everyone just said, I was hoping to get a couple questions in before anybody said it, but you were there alone. How significant was it? How would you rate your contribution? How meaningful was it? You get the idea. I'm not trying to be snarky. I'm not trying to be snide. The reality is that we met all of our production requirements. We met the fact, I can tell you as soon as there we go. We met the lack of visibility issue. I monitored it. PJ knew exactly how long you were in there. We knew which room everybody was in. We knew they were there. We had check-ins. Didn't quite get there very far because you guys were very authentic, and I love that. But we were going to come back. Hey, how was everything? And we did our, and we all know that half the time staff check-ins, nobody says a thing. They're not nearly as forthcoming as you just were. Oh, yeah, it's good. Everything's fine. We had metrics. We knew exactly how long that we assigned everybody to the breakout room. And yet, it didn't work. There was no significance, no contribution. It was not meaningful. Why? Because you were alone. And that's one of the least productive places to be when you're trying to bring real value. So what we needed was a collaborative solution, and that is what I would like to give an actual opportunity for, an actual team activity. We're going to have these conversations. So PJ, if we can redo this, let's break it up into groups of, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 5 into as many rooms as we need to do that. We'll give you a little bit longer than 30 seconds this time so that you all have an opportunity to connect. Same premise, share your experiences, your thoughts. You can disagree. You can spend the whole time talking about how stupid I sound. Whatever it is, but share, collaborate, because that's where great ideas come from. And PJ, when you're ready, we can go ahead and start assigning them to their new rooms. And during the break, we were able to figure out how I can see you. So now I can see most of you as well. I am very happy about this change of events. So I've got my chat and I've got you guys, and this is even better. I was already having a great time, but now I hope you had a great time in your breakout rooms and it was actually significant and you felt like you were able to make a contribution to the conversation, and hopefully it was meaningful. Hopefully you felt like you mattered, like your voice was heard and that people cared about what you had to share. And my goal in anything that I do is to facilitate a heart of love. And so I'm hoping that you're feeling loved, if for no other reason, because I genuinely want you to know I love you as a human being and as one that has a heart for people. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. I love you, and it's a privilege to be a part of this conversation. So for sake of time, let's go ahead and proceed. We've looked at some of what I call the real challenges. How do we fix it? We got to get to the fix on this. I want you to walk away with something tangible, something real. So let's go ahead and work on that. And there we go. Perfect. First fix, I want to talk about 2 different types of fixes. One is systemic, and then one is specific. Systemic will be more geared specifically for what you HRs are able to do within your organizations to foster a culture of unity and collaboration. The second section will be, as we promised you, 3 upskilling tactics for your managers so that they can, as boots on the ground, provide meaningful fixes as well. Now, systemically addressing the real challenges we've talked about, there are tons of things that can be done. All right, there's not just 2 or 3 or whatever, but we're going to discuss some of them in our next section. But I want to just mention that the systemic side really matters because, especially as HR reps are, which most of you are, and many of you high up in HR, you can't make every decision. You can't be there for every conversation. You can't affect how things are done. So you have to create a culture that facilitates that by others who are the ones that are actively carrying out these decisions and making these changes. And that's why we're touching on both the systemic side that you can influence and how to empower your managers to actually carry it out. So each of the 3 things we're going to talk about today very easily could be its own webinar, but we're going to try to briefly go over all 3. Fostering a culture of unity and collaboration starts with collaboration solutions, which we've just talked about. Feedback culture, huge. I know that's something you guys all agree with. And then frontline leadership development, and you're going to see how these all connect. Now, you're going to remember or recognize these 3 things that we already talked about. These were the collaboration solutions that were already on a screen 3 or 4 slides back, where we said that it was team activities and conversation monitoring and mutual accountability that was really going to bring value more than just watching someone's screen or counting keystrokes or something like that, right? But these, again, they seem kind of out of reach, right? How are you going to dictate the team strategy? Try going to your director of ops, except for I think we have an operations a COO here, but other than you, try going to your director of ops and telling them, hey, you need to assign tasks on a team metric better. They I mean, I know you're HR, but they might have some choice words for you. Who are you to tell me how to run my team, right? And so being able to force that is going to be really difficult. So how do we facilitate it instead of force it? From an HR strategy, I would encourage us to review and structure our questions to promote a team mentality. This is a subliminal strategy. For those of you that are still doing semi-annual, annual, quarterly, whatever it is, reviews, you have it super easy because you can literally just replace some of those review questions with team-oriented questions instead of individual questions. Replacing something instead of how do you feel things are going, or how do you assess your performance in the last quarter, you change that to a team-based question. How has your team progressed? It's simple, but it's powerful because it makes us stop thinking about the me factor and forces us to consider the we factor. If you have done away with those, as I know many companies have tried to get away from the semi-annual or annual options, you're still doing climate checks probably. You're still probably doing feedback surveys. You're probably still trying to touch base with people to make sure that the culture is healthy. And the same strategy applies. Yes, we want to hear their heart. Yes, we want to ask, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What can I do to support you? But if we replace just one or two of our questions, maybe more, depending on your discretion, with a team-centric question, we might just find that we start laying a foundation where people start asking team-based questions and they don't know how to answer those, right? If I ask you, if I'm the VP of people, and I ask you as an HR coordinator, hey, how are things going for you? Well, depending on our relationship, the chances are really good that if I'm the stereotypical bigwig and you're the stereotypical person that doesn't know how to talk to your boss, because who really likes to talk to their boss as a general rule? If that's the dynamic, what are you going to say? Things are good. I'm fine. How many of you hear that all the time in your interviews and in your conversation? I'm fine. Everything's good. But when you start asking a question like, hey, how is your team being managed? Or how are things going with the team? And you orient it, well, now they're having to answer for somebody else. And people get a little shaky with that unless they're certain of it. So if they're certain of it, oh man, our team is fantastic. We talk all the time. We've got great communication. We got this cool chat thing that the manager put together so we all know what's going on the project at any given time, and you can get excited with them. How's your team progressing? Good, I think. Well, what does that tell you? Infinitely more than if you ask the same question about an individual, because it just tells you they don't have a team culture. Good, I think, says I'm not invested. I have no idea how my team is actually doing. Next, it's not reasonable that you would monitor every conversation. So your HR strategy, note team spirit and HR activities. Couple of examples I would give. If you have a game night or some picnic, whatever it is, take note of how different teams get along. My rule of thumb is if they don't play well together, they probably don't work well together. If you are concerned about a relationship, maybe have them do an activity together so that you can observe how they do this fun activity together, because it'll give you a lot of insight into whether or not there's a team culture. The other thing is when you're doing those check-ins, whether it's again, a climate survey or it's your annual reviews or whatever. When I was the training manager, I used to do that, and I could always tell which teams had the best culture based on how they did their surveys. I don't mean what they said, I mean how they did it. The teams that all did their survey within like maybe a half hour of each other, where usually that meant that a manager was saying, all right, your turn while everyone covers. Okay, now you're done. Your turn while everyone covers. Okay, now it's your turn. And it was a collaborative experience. They often had a more productive working environment and a healthier content or a healthier culture in that team than the one where I'd get one response from one team member and then a day later I'd get something else. And it showed that they weren't talking. They weren't saying, hey, have you done that yet? Hey, what did you say when you did that? There was no collaboration. And you can gain these insights by kind of just paying attention to the conversations, maybe that are unofficial, but they give so much information. And then mutual accountability. This is probably the one that's the most synchronistic with HR normal activities, because when we're talking about mutual accountability, we're talking about really feedback culture, which is going to be our next topic of conversation. Feedback culture is something that we've been talking about now for several years. It's not going away anytime soon. It's another one that could have its own webinar. I actually did a webinar on feedback culture. You can find that on the SML website if you want to look at that. But for the sake of time here, I'll keep it super superficial. If you want to facilitate great feedback culture, there's about 5 or 10 things that you should do, but 3 of the most important include make it truly anonymous at first. I'm going to be honest with you. People don't trust feedback forms. They just don't. We've all been a part of a slimy organization that took the feedback form and then used it against you later. Or magically they got fired later or something like that. People don't trust them. So in fact, I worked on an organization when I was that training manager where I had to do it. I was considered to have the best morale with the team. And so they asked me to do a anonymous climate survey. So I went and I hit every level, different people, try to get the full gamut of conversation. And then I got my job threatened by the CEO if I wouldn't tell her who said what, because she had already determined whose opinions mattered and whose didn't. That happens a lot. People don't trust because they've been a part of those types of organizations. So I believe it has to be anonymous at first. And I would say you got to do it at least 3 times and be able to show the anonymity before anyone's going to start giving real information. Of course, anonymous feedback is not the epitome of feedback culture. This is just the foundation of it so that you can generate it and people will start being more open because they realize that their feedback is taken seriously and they feel like they're contributing and they're loved and they're valued and all of the things that we talked about. Additionally, I would encourage us to make sure that that feedback is 360 degrees. I hate unilateral feedback when one person gets to dictate how another person is viewed. I think that's incredibly unhealthy for culture. So 360-degree feedback, which I would assume most of us are at least familiar with, but that means that I'm talking to the supervisor, the subordinate, the individual, and the colleague. Everybody is contributing to that conversation so that I get a good idea of what's actually happening. It's the only kind of feedback that I recommend, and it's the only kind that I facilitate for my clients. And the last one, this is so important. Take verifiable action on that feedback. There are few things more frustrating for staff members than to take the time and sometimes give a little bit of courage to actually fill out a feedback form only to feel like it went nowhere and it did nothing. It's debilitating for them. So as HR, this can be challenging for us, right? Because we have to be careful, right? We can't come out and be like, hey guys, thanks for the feedback. That told us that Mr. Brown was a horrible person, so we fired him. And we can't say that, right? Like that would not be couth. But it's super important that we frame our future comments in a way that facilitates that trust and develops that feedback culture. Something like, we receive several requests for more breaks, and while we can't specifically give you more breaks, what we're hearing is that people don't feel like they're actually getting a rest on their break. And so what we can do is fill in the blank, whatever your organization is able to, or maybe even something that is even more aloof but possibly more powerful, such as we want each of you to know that we read every single response. We're not sure who said what because it's anonymous, and that's a really good thing to say if you can. But we really appreciate those who took the time to submit their thoughts. And one of the things we noticed in the feedback we received was fill in the blank. And we're looking into how we can best address that. So you should see some change in this area within the next fill in the blank. Right? What can you do? How can you say, hey, I've heard you. It didn't just all go in a drawer. It certainly didn't go into the shredder, which most of us have felt like that's exactly what happens in our organizations. So feedback culture, let's get to our final method of fostering a culture of unity and collaboration. We have collaborative solutions, we've got feedback culture, and then we've got frontline leadership development. One of the things that I find in almost every feedback loop, if the company has effectively implemented it, is a call by pretty much everyone to empower the managers and supervisors. I'm going to guess that you guys have all probably had this type of feedback. All right. I'm not going to ask you to put it in the chat this time because of time, but I'm guessing we've all had that type of feedback where you're getting at least one complaint a week about a leader or a manager or a supervisor. And those are just the ones that are bold enough to actually say something in confidence. Of course, they don't actually want their name out there. But yeah, this is happening. And then everyone else wants it too. Executives want a better bottom line, and it costs a lot to replace the people that these managers are running off. You want to stop wasting your time trying to replace people. And even the leaders themselves want to be empowered. As PJ said, I call them the forgotten leaders because the average team lead has received a whopping pamphlet in terms of training when it comes to leadership training. They're not being given much more than that. And so we're giving a lot to our executives, which is great, but the executives aren't engaging with the people, and the people are everywhere. So they can't really. So here's the deal. You want a unity and collaboration? Your frontline leaders are in need of basic leadership development. I'm saying that if they've been giving nothing more than a booklet or even a pamphlet or whatever, they're not ready to lead the team. And this is very important. Why? Because the current business world actually requires not just basic development, but advanced development. I think of a manager I worked with who had been basically promoted, two managers. They'd both been promoted. One of them was promoted with no training whatsoever. He had 3 people there in the room. And by the time I got there, there was only 1 left. It was a horrible manager. But that wasn't even the worst part. The guy across the room from him, who had also been promoted, also given no empowerment, all of his people were remote. How much infinitely harder is it now? No training, no nothing. And now you got to figure out how to do it through a screen. Thankfully, the one that was remote was actually the more proactive one. He went out and got some training himself and did some things before I got there, which really was a benefit to the team. But ultimately, the single difference between organizations that are effectively able to navigate the new world of work is found in their frontline leaders. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of things that the executives need to do. But as we try to figure out how to effectively manage teams that are present and hybrid and international and all that, the leaders of those teams have to be empowered to do so well, which is why the third section is all about upskilling your managers. And I'm going to assume we're ready to go on that, but you can put in the chat whether you are while we watch this video that I saw last week. I thought that this was absolutely amazing. Let's see here. Can I get this to start?
No, we can't hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it? Uh-oh. All right, my apologies. Thank you for telling me. Let's see here. Let me. All right, you know what? Because of sake of time, if you haven't seen this yet, look this video up. You can Google Toodaloo, which is how she signs off all of her videos. And basically the conversation is, she says, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to take the rest of the afternoon off. And her manager says, well, you don't have to take the rest of the afternoon off. You work from home. Yes, but I am not feeling well. I can't work if I'm ill. Well, that's not the deal. If you work from home, you just work from home. That's sick time is only for office employees. And then even still, they can just work from home. And so she says, oh, I'm looking for the memo. And well, there was no memo. That's just how it is now. Great. I'm going to send an email to HR to make sure I'm aligned with the correct policy. And then HR, of course, calls the manager who was telling her she can't take the afternoon off to be sick. And I think that this happens a lot with managers that just don't know how to effectively move in this new age, this new interdispersed age. So 3 skills that managers need to up level in. We'll go through this very quickly because I am so short on time. It is ridiculous. So let's get through this very fast. Final takeaway, 3 skills. Upskilling our managers in these areas is going to be at least a good start to helping navigate this new dynamic. Effective meetings is number 1, intentional availability and communication is number 2, and staff alignment is number 3. All right, effective meetings. This might seem like a silly one, like, come on, John, meetings, seriously? Here's the deal. Most meetings suck in the first place. All right, they suck so bad that I think Elon Musk is the one that's credited for saying, if you're not getting anything from meetings or attributing anything to meetings, you can just leave. All right, because most people are not getting much out of meetings. But here's the deal. Not only do managers need to know how to run a basic meeting because they've probably never been trained to do that, once they have the basics down, send the notes out in advance, keep it consistent, schedule it, all of those basic meeting tactics, well, then they have to figure out how to adapt that meeting format to this variety of staff participation. Maybe they've done it right. They sent out the notice in advance. They sent out the notes. They collaborated. They asked for feedback. They're going to make this a productive. They've got an agenda, all of that. But if they did all that while ignoring the 2 people that are in the conference room while everybody else is on the screen, or vice versa, they ignored the 2 people on the screen because everybody else is in the conference room, well, they've just failed in that meeting. It's not an effective meeting because they've just alienated 2 people. They got to set up the screen so that everyone's represented. They've got to set expectations that all the cameras be turned on so that people can engage and see faces. They got to keep track of who all's present. Maybe adding people in the middle of the meeting and calling on people equally so that they're really engaging the totality of the team and not just the people that are easiest to call on because they're across the table or they're not in the room across town, they're on my monitor. Next, this is true regardless of where your staff is, but it becomes harder to manage when dealing with intra-remote employees. They got to make sure they don't have cliques or inside groups. People who work at the office shouldn't be given insider knowledge because they happen to work across the way. If that happens, what happens? Well, now when that information is delivered in the group, the outside people feel alienated, like they're getting the information last because they're not as important. And the people that already know the information feel like they shouldn't have to be at the meeting because I already know this. Why did you bother me with this meeting? Everybody loses when there's these inside cliques and kind of insider voices. So we can't have an us versus them mentality. And that's what's so easy to happen. You have the in office versus the out of office, and there becomes this us versus them mentality that ends up existing. And we're trying to avoid that, which is one of the things that they have to know how to effectively navigate with these meetings. And then lastly, with this all established, they have to get people involved. That's pretty self-explanatory. That means, calling on the person, especially if they got their camera off, seeking out the thoughts of the quiet ones, stuff like that. All right. So second, upskilling, intentional availability. Intentional availability. I got a whole series on YouTube about this. You can reach out if you want the links for that. But here's the thing. Leaders are not approachable by default. Just the title, the position, not approachable. Sucks, but it is the way it is. So there are three things that I think help overcome that, because when you add the virtual component, they may as well be Zeus on Mount Olympus. They're completely unapproachable, because now it's not even like I see you at the water cooler. I have to actually call you. I got to actually get on chat and bother you, and that's very difficult, right? So the idea here, how do we fix that? When I was the director with all the different teams, I did three things at least. I had scheduled availability. Every Friday, I had open door hours. It wasn't the only time I was open, but everybody knew I would be open on Friday. In addition to that, every 6 months, I had a one-on-one conversation with every single person in my division. This gave me an opportunity not to review them. This is not an assessment. This is not a review. Literally, I would say at the beginning, the whole purpose of this meeting is for me to hear your heart. And I would ask questions. How do you feel? What would you change if you were in charge? What do you want to see changed in the next 6 months? These meetings provided a space where I got to hear really some very deep things from my staff. In addition to being scheduled, we want the availability to be consistent. This was where I didn't do great. I always did it on Friday, but I didn't always do it at the same time of day. And I think that was a detriment to the overall success. What you really want is just like a class or an event or whatever. You want to be consistent. You want the same thing as a leader, that your staff knows, oh, every Friday afternoon, or maybe it's every morning at 9 or every afternoon at 4 or whatever. I know that there's flexibility to go see them, and I can take advantage. And then lastly, there needs to be reminded availability. The idea that I can just say, hey, my door's always open and I'm good, it doesn't work that way. Every Friday morning, I would send everybody a reminder. Don't forget, it's open hours. Let me know if you need anything. I'm here. I want to see you. This is for anything. Doesn't even have to be business. If you got something going on in your life, I want to talk to you. And I would provide that reminder so that they knew that there was an open door. And I think this is a critical part of leadership upskilling in this new virtual world. Lastly, we have staff alignment. I'm going to breeze through this very quickly. Something I'm seeing more and more of is the tendency to assign jobs based on where you are. If you're in the office, you get to do the real work. If you're remote, you get to do the busy work. And if you're like a VA, you get to do the stuff that basically AI or monkeys or really anybody could do. And part of that is because we've hired roles, like we post a role that says, hey, this is remote and it's data entry. Okay, I get that for sure. But while the tendency is understandable, I think that we often cost our organization success. And so I want to encourage our leaders to be trained in staff alignment, where the skills of the individual, the interests of the organization, and the opportunity of the client all mix, and we figure out where that sweet spot is. Who is the best person to meet this need? Who has the creative heart? Who is able to meet this need uniquely, so that I don't have the person that just because they're far away, but they're an accountant, I'm trying to have them build an ad on for social media. Meanwhile, I got the person that's in office trying to run my numbers, and they are an artist. And we're not actually aligning passions. We're not aligning real talents, skills, and abilities. We have gone through a lot we barely have any time for Q&A. We've covered so much. I feel like it was also kind of a giant tease because I kept mentioning YouTube or webinar or clients, whatever. That wasn't the goal. I'm not here to sell you, upsell you some special thing. There's a lot to say about all of this. And that's the reality. That's why it's so complex, because this world of intra-remote work is incredibly complex. We've got visibility challenges. We got relevance challenges. We need to foster collaboration and feedback and leadership development. We need to empower our leaders to effectively engage with their staff through effective meetings and intentional availability and alignment with what their staff does. And that is incredibly difficult to navigate. So our next slide does have the Q&A time. And I don't know, Patricia, I don't know how much we need to be done exactly at 11, but we have Q&A, and I'll let you run that. And then whenever you're ready, we'll put up the last couple slides.
Great. Does anybody have any questions?
They want to know when lunch is.
Yeah, I know you covered a lot of great information, and we certainly do appreciate that and appreciate such an extensive overview of all the different areas and things that we do need to be focusing on. And I'll let you talk to your last few slides.
Yeah, awesome. It is a ton. If you ever want to get in touch with me or the organization, we are passionate about reducing employee turnover by empowering frontline leaders, creating a culture that inspires confidence while also in promoting excellence and driving unparalleled customer satisfaction, because we believe that if you empower your internal clients, your staff, they in fact are going to be able to better serve your external clients. Feel free to use the QR code or use any of the information on the screen. And as I go to the slide that I think most of you would like, but for some reason is not coming up, give me just a second. Okay, we're going to click this manually because for whatever reason it's not coming up. There we go. There's the SHRM credit. And while you guys are taking that information down and taking a picture, I want to thank PJ for the roundtable. It's a wonderful, I love your heart, PJ. I've loved getting to know you during this time. Thank you to each person who attended. Thank you to those who are going to watch later. Thank you to those of you who, whether you watch this or not, you have a heart to serve your people. You are changing the world one person at a time, and I admire you deeply. And thank you to all of those who've gone before me, mentored me, taught me, and given me the tools that I now get to share with others.
Jon, thank you so much for what you've done and for what you're continuing to do. We certainly do appreciate it. And as everyone knows, from the Roundtable's perspective, I'm always concerned about ensuring all of you that you do know that you are absolutely doing such an important job, and to make sure that you take the time to also take care of yourselves as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We hope that you have a great rest of your day and a fantastic weekend. Bye, everybody.